Hello there, and welcome to our East Lothian crop trials webinar today. And we're focusing on winter wheat and barley varieties currently in trials. By way of an introduction, my name is Mark Bowsher-Gibbs, and I'm based at the Edinburgh office and part of the SRUC consulting team. I'll be chairing today's crop trials webinar for you, which we put together as part of the Farm Advisory Service programme funded by Scottish Government. And hopefully our agenda today will bring you plenty of information without the risks of the rain that we've been having so much of lately. I'd like to, if I may, take this opportunity before we start to thank our trial site's hosts, the Right Honourable David Dalrymple and John Stewart, for continuing to host the trials on their farm. Thank you very much. On to the agenda then. Today, our presentations will be supplemented by photographs taken from the trial sites over the last few days. Professor Fiona Burnett, Head of Crop Pathology and Arable Knowledge Lead at SRUC, will be reviewing the work on appropriate fungicide dosage rates in wheat. Dr. Steve Hoad, from the Department of Plant and Soil Sciences at SRUC, will guide us through his selection of the most promising wheat and barley varieties in trial. And Neil Havis follows on with a closer look at the disease control and appropriate doses with particular reference to barley. And after Neil, Donald Dunbar gives us a deeper insight into the various farmer-led trials work that's currently underway. We round off the presentations with Julian Bell's commentary on crop marketing insights. That should leave us with sufficient time for a final question and answer session before we close. Do feel free to post questions during the webinar via the Q&A tab, and if we don't get around to picking them up there, and then we'll raise them in the open panel session at the end. Any unanswered questions will be replied to after the webinar by email. Craig Bothwell, my colleague, is controlling things in the background, so if you have any questions, you can message him through the chat button, and we will be applying for basis and RSO points. If you want to register for those, please do email karen.little@sac.co.uk. Finally, during the webinar, we have a few audience partition polls that will pop up for you to exercise your fingertips with. Here's the first of two to start us off, and then we'll move on to the first presentation. The poll will come up in a second, and it's just looking at yield expectations this year. If you could remember to hit the submit button once you've chosen one of those options. Compared to this time last year, are your forthcoming wheat harvest yield expectations 20% more, 20% less, 10% less, 10% more, or the same? We've got one more poll coming up after this one, which will ask the similar questions about spring barley. Okay, so probably not interesting. Nobody's actually thinking that they're going to improve their yields over last year, and we'll probably pick up on that general view of what's going to happen at harvest later on through the webinar. The second question asks the same of spring barley. It's been a difficult and challenging season for spring barley, and if you'd like to hit the submit button after you've chosen one of those options, we'll get a similar picture of what's happening to spring barley. While that's coming back, Fiona Burnett is with us. Fiona is Professor of Applied Plant Pathology and Arable Knowledge Lead at SRUC. Fiona, you'll have a view, no doubt, on how challenging the season's been for disease control. I did note yesterday that only some 5 miles from our trial site at Southfield, the rolling 12 months rainfall was over 900 mil, so that's up a fair bit. Before I hand over to you, I'll just relay the figures of the second poll, and that's actually not a dissimilar expression to the wheat. So thank you for completing those. Fiona, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. And yes, that's a good introduction to some of the challenges that people are perceiving or experiencing this season. Yes, so Mark referenced the kind of heavy rain and challenging conditions. Yes, so I mean that sort of excessive rain really throughout the season, ideal for septoria. And then we had that kind of brief warm spell in May, which probably just, heated conditions. The only saving grace when it comes to septoria has been that it's been cooler than normal. But actually, the trials at Southfield that I'll talk about today are really quite typical in that the septoria is now beginning to express itself, and actually it's yellow rust that has nipped into the gap and is the first to show. So that's really made it very challenging, both on this trial site, but also commercially. So difficult weather, short weather windows, and then actually where it's been dry, we've had windy weather, so complex spray mixes and poor timing. So disease control has been, really very challenging this season. And so imagining it, you're now at Southfield, what I wanted to do was take you through the fungicide performance trial there, which is, always a good kind of in-season barometer of, how fungicides are performing. And important to say that these trials are designed to give us the maximum chance of getting lots of disease. So you can see everything here that I've done wrong. It's barrel, so a varietal rating of 4.4, so really geared up to having septoria at the site. And the other thing is that it's a single hit. So we really do test the fungicides in an extreme form here. So the spray was applied at the end of May there, and leaf 1 had been out, the flag leaf had been out for quite a bit. So we're beginning to see that in terms of how the site looks. Before I show you some photographs of the site that were taken last week, just a quick run through of how the fungicides are sitting at the moment, and to remind you of that new chemistry that we had this year. So you can see there, if I look at the straights on the right-hand side, you've got Miravis, which is that new pidiflumethofen, and that new SDHI for this season, looking very strong there, with Pectiga just behind it, so that new QII that's in Univoc. And the other important things to pick out there, Proline at a full dose, looking fairly poor and only marginally better than Arizona. So that was the kind of starting perceptions for the performance of the fungicides we would expect. And there's the yield benefits that you get. So again, that sort of long trajectory we've had with prothioconazole being one of the older azoles, only adding marginally to the yield there in the trials in the last season. And interestingly there, you've got Miravis coming to the top in terms of yield, whereas actually in terms of disease control last season, it sat somewhere just behind Pectiga. So those are our two kind of leading products. VMOI was that new SDHI isoflupram, which came out from Bayer last year. So it's kind of middle of the pack. So yeah, the nice thing here, being able to present it as photographs to you rather than in the field, means we don't need to dot backwards and forwards between plots. So I've been able to order the photographs more sensibly. So, I mean, first impressions when we looked at the site last week is a kind of startling level of disease and green leaf loss. So the untreated one there, the leaf 2 and 3, largely away, the flag leaf senescing. And interestingly, that yellow rust that you see there in that photograph on the right, so it's the first disease. It's much quicker to express itself than septoria. So those flag leaves now being really challenged by yellow rust. So that's the kind of untreated to get your eye in. And then just quickly running through both the azoles, the methyltrifluconazole and the prothioconazole actually looked really poor. They were struggling at the site. So again, leaf senescence fairly high and quite a lot of disease in the prothioconazole full rate. And that's the Myrisa. So again, we're seeing septoria and leaf 2, quite a lot of yellow rust on the flag. And leaf 3, again, really senescing away there, so only 20% green. The full rate Myrisa was marginally better, but still fairly poor. So again, you can see in those photographs that the canopy is dying off, and we've really very visible septoria there in the canopy. So that's a kind of fairly low bar for the other treatments to meet. Interestingly, Arizona looked quite visually better at the moment. I dare say it will come under pressure. And again, you see yellow rust coming in on the flag leaf there. But the canopy much greener, and interestingly, looking visually much better than the azels at this point in time. So had you been able to visit the site, I think that would have been something that you would have picked up on. There's Miravis, so that's that new SDHI for this season, and here it is at half rate. So again, remember that this is a big test for the fungicides. It's a little bit better than the azoles, but septoria is still really evident there. And partly that's a visual thing that the leaves are greener, so the septoria stands out more. We've a little more green leaf at on leaf 3 there, but it's by no means, clean. So it's struggling a bit. Here it is at full rate, so the increased dose has certainly helped, and you see a bit more green leaf in the canopy there. You can still see yellow rust on the flag, but it's visibly much better, and septoria certainly looks much better at this full rate. So that's encouraging. Pictiga at half a rate, so that was the new QII as in Univoc. Its disease is still fairly obvious, as you can see from those pictures. Leaf 3 is still quite green, and flag leaf and leaf 2. So the disease looks quite marked, as you can see in that picture on the right. So again, quite high septoria levels popping out there. Again, here we have it at full rate, so significantly better when you look at it visually there. So there's our best chemistry under a full test, and really, better than untreated and towards the better end of the treatments that we were seeing. Univoc here looking better than the other treatments, but bear in mind, this is the only mixed treatment that I'm showing you. So this is how you would be using products in practice. We're not ever using straights in the field, I hope. So again, this is towards the better end of the treatments at half rate, but we are losing quite a lot of green leaf area there. You can see, barely 40% on leaf 3 there, a little septoria in the flag and rust coming in. And again, even with our best treatments here, coming up the dose rate has been helpful. So the full dose rate of Univoc, visually much, much stronger. So just to give you a quick summary of that as a chart, and pick out some of the stronger products there in terms of septoria. You can see that it's, Arizona, interesting, visually looking very good. Pictiga at full rate looking good. And those Univoc ones, particularly at full rate, looking good. So that's your mixtures. So that would be a visual rush through what we would have seen at the trial site. And just to say a little bit about the resistance status and pick out a few. So these are these kind of toppling charts that we see with 100% control from products at the top. And to pick on Proline there, you can see how between 2020 and 2021, its efficacy has really declined. And we know that's because of the nature of the septoria strains that we have. But you can see at the top there, things like Miravis still relatively stable from launch. And Myrisa, the newer azole, again, relatively stable in terms of its control. So struggling at the site, but, we hope that that's, a stable situation. And just quickly a reminder there of the efficacy of the products against rust. Vmoy looking strong there, so that it was the new Iblon isoflupram. Pictiga and Myrisa there sitting in the middle of the pack, although Pictiga looks stronger in the trial results that I've just shown you. And obviously yield responses where we have a lot of rust, as we do this year, are really, quite marked. So we can be easily up to, a 2 ton plus, where we're controlling rust well. And again, just a quick run through those results at Southfield when it comes to yellow rust. Again, you can see that the azoles are struggling from this single hit. Pictiga looking slightly better there, and the Univoc, that mixed treatment at the end, was visually looking stronger. But we obviously bring these to you in the winter meetings, and you can see the final and summarised results. I wanted to just quickly finish with a point on the risk of mycotoxins, fusariums and mycotochium this year. So all strongly driven by the amount of rainfall over flowering and over the ripening period. So clearly, you know, we're still getting heavy rain, which is increasing the risk. So hopefully your well-timed flowering sprays will have helped mitigate that risk a bit. But just a reminder that you need to do a risk assessment before you put wheat into the food chain. So yeah, a quick summary from what we've seen there at the trial sites. Really all the products are struggling this year, and the azoles were noticeably struggling at the site. Even for the better products, we were seeing quite a strong dose response at the site. So this probably hasn't been a year for massively reduced rates. But, you know, as I've tried to emphasize, these trials are an extreme test for the products. And hopefully commercially you're experiencing slightly better control. Thanks, Mark. I'll stop sharing now.
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, it just strikes me how much disease we've got in the crops, and I know you chose a relatively weak variety with a poor rating, but it sort of begs the question: at what stage in the season do you realise that, you know, the full rate expensive products are required? It's quite difficult to anticipate, you know, how that's going to impact out on the crop, isn't it, with Septoria?
Yeah, and this is the danger, that we treat all crops as if it's the worst case scenario. I think it would be important to say, and Steve may reference this when he gets the varieties, the difference that a better variety make at this
Yeah.
site was really very, very marked. So that ability to create a bit of resilience there by using, so we've now got varieties that sit, you know, fully 2 points ahead of barrel when it comes to Septoria. And that really was coming through at the site. And again, in a year like this, where it's been hard to get sprays on in a well-timed manner,
Yeah.
having that buffering effect of a better
Yeah.
variety has been
Yeah.
so useful.
Yeah. Yeah. There's other ways of fighting it rather than reaching for the can, I suppose. And hopefully Steve will pick up that varietal strength in his talk coming up shortly. Thanks, Fiona. So before we pop on to Steve's presentation on varieties, one more poll question, the third of the fourth that we've got for you today, and it's to do with the types of wheat that you're growing. Which wheat market or markets are you growing for this year's harvest? You can tick more than one to cover the groups that you are growing for. While we're getting the results back for that, I'll just introduce Steve. He's going to talk to us through his pick of the varieties that he believes should be of particular interest to you for the forthcoming season. Hi, Steve, are you with us?
Okay, well, thanks very much. Yes, and I'll try to follow on from Fiona, particularly on the wheat and the value of improved resistance, particularly in Septoria. So what I'd like to do today is to really just to mention a few varieties from the rather long AHDB lists, and I'm just making some top picks. So six choices: winter wheat, spring barley from the Southfield site, and I'll mention with one slide some other top picks for winter barley. So starting with winter wheat, these are the choices. So again, it's a subset from the Scottish list, which has 16 varieties on it currently. So I've chosen that the top four there, that they are the soft feed distilling varieties. Bamford is a biscuit making variety, which looks very interesting for grain distilling as well. And LG Beowulf is a hard feed variety with some interesting agronomic features. The links there are to the Scottish list and to the AHDB's recommended list, where you can get the full picture or the variety information. So just with RGT Stokes here, we can think of this as being a rather versatile variety in terms of its suitability to different soil types, different rotational positions. It's high yielding. It's a bit later than average. It's a +3, so it's one of the later varieties. But in the right locations, I still think it has quite a significant value in terms of our main markets. Untreated yield is 83. So compared to some of the improved varieties with better resistance, is perhaps a little bit on the low side. And certainly over the next 2 to 3 years, expect to see the untreated yields increase in the soft wheats in the way that they have done in many of the hard textured wheat varieties. So that's the first of the top 6 for wheat. So I'd just like to follow that then with RGT Bairstow. Again, it's a high yielding variety, suits distilling and soft feed. It's rated good for distilling. Like Bairstow, it suits a range of different positions within the crop rotations, very versatile across soil types, and is also good as a second wheat. So it's likely to be one of the main varieties that we're seeing in the ground this particular autumn. With characteristics like straw stiffness, both Stokes and Bairstow are kind of modest straw stiffness, and they do improve with PGRs. So they do stiffen well with PGRs. Bairstow a little bit earlier maturing than Stokes. Cadiosealum in the same category, the soft feed varieties. So this is in its second year on the recommended list. Again, high yielding. It's got slightly better yellow rust and septoria triticide resistance compared to the previous 2 varieties, and it's got a slightly stiffer straw as well. So again, I think this is a useful addition to the range of varieties that we are recommending, and this is certainly one of the preferred options from the distilling and the soft feed category. Now, just going on to a new variety in this category, Blackstone, high yielding, an improved untreated yield, which reflects its slightly better septoria triticide resistance. Other features positive about this new year 1 variety is that it's got a much stiffer straw as well. So maturity wise, it will be similar to Bairstow and Zealand at +2, but certainly in terms of its agronomic features, it looks a little bit of a step forward. So it'll be interesting to get your views on this variety, and if you are going to be growing it this coming season. For a soft variety, it really does have very good Hagberg figures, and so that's something that I think is a concern, perhaps in areas where we might have pre-germination. So that's another nice feature about this particular variety. On to Bamford now. So it's a soft variety, but it's a biscuit making variety. In group 3, it's very high yielding, 105, and it's got an improved untreated yield as well at 92, and that's partly reflected in a very good triticide resistance at 6.7. It's a bit earlier than the other varieties at +1, and it's got some really excellent Hagberg and specific weight figures for a soft variety. So Bamford with a medium rating for distilling, could be a very interesting variety for us and serving different purposes. And I'll just finish now with the final of the 6. So this is a hard feed variety, LG Beowulf. This is the highest yielding variety on the Scottish list, 107. And it's got a very good untreated yield at 91 as well. Again, as with with Bamford, this good untreated yield is in part due to a much improved resistance to septoria triticide. Beowulf's other features are very good specific weight for a feed variety and relatively stiff straw. Okay, so those are the top 6, but please to put those in context of the other choices, and I think you've got plenty of good options for this coming autumn. So just onto spring barley now, and the way I've done this is I'm not focusing on the market leaders. I'm thinking of perhaps what's coming through, what's developing, looking ahead. I know that the sector is quite conservative in choice, but we do have varieties that could add value over the coming years. So the market leaders, by that I mean Laureate, LG Diablo and Sassy, which take up the bulk of the intake into the maltings in Scotland. It's got Firefox, then Tennyson Diviner in year 2, and then 3 new varieties there that I'll also mention briefly. So when it comes to Firefox, this is a fully recommended variety, and it's now got full approval for malt distilling from the Malting Barley Committee. High yielding variety, good untreated yield. And what I like about this variety is it's got some good agronomic features. It looks stronger than many of the other varieties, which in terms of maturity are +2, whereas Firefox is 0 on the scale. So it's relatively early maturing, good brackling resistance, and intermediate resistance to Rhynchosporum as well. So I think this has got a nice collection of agronomic features, as well as beginning to achieve some market share in Scotland. So 2 varieties that are just a year behind. So Tennyson, and then following that with Diviner. So Tennyson, high yielding variety. It's achieved now its full MBC approval for malt distilling, and it's got a provisional approval for brewing. So this means it could become a dual purpose varieties like Laureate. High yields, relatively good untreated yield, good blackfin resistance, but it is a little bit weaker when it comes to Rhynchosporium. It's only got a 5, and specific weights is a bit lower compared to some of the other varieties. So do bear that in mind. It is high yielding, looks as though it has versatility across different growing conditions, but it's a variety that could suit dual purpose needs of the industry. Then Diviner, so like Tennyson, is in year 2 on the recommended list. This has now got some provisional approval 2 from the Malting Barley Committee. It's a malt distilling only variety, but it's a high yielding, 103 for the Scottish figures, and good untreated yield at 90. Excellent brackling resistance, and it's a bit earlier maturing than Tennyson and some of the other later varieties. So a range of good features, pretty good specific weight, but do bear in mind that the Rhynchosporium resistance in this variety is one of the weaker values, so it's only a 4. Okay, so just bear that in mind with this particular choice. Just onto the 3 new varieties that I'm picking up for today. So Belter looks as though it has potential use for both malt distilling and for brewing. It's very high yielding, 103, with an improved untreated yield of 94, and excellent resistance to brackling. It's got very low level of screening, so relatively large, bold grain. So could be a very useful variety if it continues to make progress on the quality side, and it could be another dual purpose variety that puts pressure on Laureates and Diablo in the future. So at the same stage, Olsen, potentially another dual purpose variety, high yielding, good untreated yield as well. More kind of average in its agronomics, but again, I think it could have a place depending on the developments of Laureate, or the maintenance of Laureate and Sassy and Diablo over the next 2 years. Then I've just finished the selections with actually a brewing variety, a new brewing variety that could suit a range of purposes, like RG Planet has done for us in the past. So very high yielding, 105, good untreated yield at 91, and a relatively good resistance to Rhynchosporium at a 7. Okay, so so this might give some added value in areas where this is particularly important. It's a little bit down on specific weights. Maturity, like many other varieties, is a +2. But I think across those varieties, I think you can see a range of different strengths, some weaknesses, but certainly a lot of scope for putting pressure on the market leaders. So I think this is just my final slides. No pictures with these ones, but I'm just pulling out 6 choices from the malting, the winter barley list. So the established Tardis and Bolton, also supported by Lightning, and some relatively new ones here, sort of headed by LG Caravel in year 2 and LG Capital in year 1. Both Caravel and Capital take yield 1 or 2 percentage points higher, so they're maintaining competitive as high yielding 2-row feed varieties that compete relatively well with the 6-row hybrids. And then just finishing with one of the picks of the hybrids, SY Kingsbarn, very established in Scotland, high yield, good specific weight, and has been very consistent. Okay, so do look at the further information on the links provided there, and then please come back if you have any particular questions, particularly as we go towards sowing this autumn. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, fascinating as always. Thank you for that. I've got a couple of questions coming in. One's relating to skinning. Are we any closer to getting a score for skinning susceptibility?
Yes, it's something that's headed by the Malting Barley Committee, particularly the micro-malting group that feeds into that. We do get scores on varieties that are coming through national listing and as candidates. We don't do a full formal test on the recommended list varieties, but Scottish Agronomy and SRUC do make scores at some sites. So we are beginning to get a bit of a feel for where varieties might fit in a pecking order. So LG Diablo, for example, has been relatively weak. And it's encouraging that varieties like Firefox and Diviner look more resistant. Okay, so on a 1 to 10 scale, if Diablo was kind of weak at the 10 end, say the 10% end, we might expect kind of Firefox and Diviner to be kind of 5-ish, so kind of significantly better. So we're trying to support the information that Malting Barley Committee provides with some more local information on the recommended list varieties from the different trials.
And do we report that sort of formally as yet?
It's data it's collected outside of at this stage outside of the testing system. So it's on the recommended list varieties. The data for the national list and the candidates, that is part of the AHD database, although that's not actually published on their main data page. But we could look into that to see whether we could make that more prominent.
Okay, super. Just one last question before we leave wheat. So we were talking earlier about the disease pressure with Septoria in the wheats, and just as a takeaway from you, Steve, was there any sort of variety that you saw that dealt with that Septoria pressure better than others in the trials this year? Did anything stand out particularly, either treated or untreated?
Yeah, well, as Fiona has alluded to, there can be quite a lot of pressure from different diseases, and it can come in quite quickly. And our site at East Lothian over years has often thrown up 1 or 2 surprises, even varieties that have got relatively good resistance. But I think what's evident is that for Septoria, that difference from a 5 to a 6, and then nudging towards a 7 in some varieties, has really quite high value. And you know, outside of the problems we've had with varieties with say poor pedigree, where resistance has been eroded, we can see in other other breeders with different material are getting some real value where sectoral resistance is above 6. And that's certainly reflected in the untreated yields that we get in those varieties. And where we get varieties with untreated yields getting up towards 90, then we look behind that, and that's often because of a good resistance to septoria.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks very much. Neil's joined us. Hi, Neil. How are you doing? Neil, you're going to talk to us about disease in spring barley in particular.
I am. I'm going to talk about barley disease control. So thanks, Mark. Afternoon, everybody. I'll share my screen. Okay, afternoon again, everybody. So as Mark says, I'm going to talk about barley disease control. So the main thing we're interested in barley, obviously, you've heard Fiona talk about the wheat. Barley is very different from wheat, and it's not source linked, it's sink limited. So your potential yield for barley is set much earlier. So what we're trying to do is maximize that. And that means you're looking to maximize that tiller formation, you're looking at maximizing tiller survival and maximizing that canopy development. And then really in terms of once that potential yield is set, getting that yield, it's all about the 5 weeks post-ear emergence. That's when the grain filling occurs. You can see it in the graph at the top of the slide. So keeping that canopy going for those 5 weeks to fill and maximize that potential yield. And that's what we're trying to do. And just below that, we've got some of the 3 of the major yield robbers that we have. Certainly in spring barley, the Rhynchosporium on the left, Ramularia in the middle, and net blotch on the right-hand side. So thinking about that, how we're going to do that, you need to maximize that plant survival. And it's been discussed already. We've had such a cool, wet spring. And the risk of fusariums, not just in the wheats, but also in barley, fusariums, mycodochiums, they can impact your survival. And also, if you're growing a crop for seed this year, you need to be thinking about, am I going to need a seed treatment next year as well? So this is just some of the options. We do have seed treatments options available. Pretty good control of fusariums and mycodochiums. The picture with covered smut and loose smut is a bit more variable, so it's always worth checking about what product you're hoping to use. We've touched on, we'll talk about net blotch in a bit more detail, so you can see a couple of the seed treatments there do have noted activity against net blotch, and that might be an important issue for you going into next year. Okay, so briefly, I just want to talk about some kind of typical programs. This is winter barley. Winter barley, often it's a long time between sowing and your T0 spray timing, so you might want to consider a T0, especially if you've got mildew in there. Fiona's touched on the importance of yellow rust. We've seen a lot of yellow rust in wheat. We've also seen it in barley, so you might want to think about something with mildew activity, so Helix, and possibly the Comet to control the yellow rust. Proline is the good all-rounder. And then with winter barley, the T1 spray timing around about 30-31, this is where you get maximum response in terms of yield. So this is protecting that crop. That's what I was talking about, that tiller survival. So you're looking for a strong mixture of products. So Siltra and Astra X Pro, pretty good and robust. We need to control that Rhynchosporium early on as well. And Phoenix. So there's a lot of experimental work that's shown that 2 shots of Phoenix gives you pretty good control of Ramularia. So you know Ramularia is going to be an issue for you, think about the Phoenix. If you've got less of a disease issue in the crop, you could think about perhaps just going with the Proline and Comet. And then onto the T2. So this is the major timing to control Ramularia. So Revstar would be your best option, and Phoenix as well. If you wanted a lower disease or you're less concerned about Ramularia, you'd maybe cut that down to Siltra and a Phoenix mix. Spring barley, again, T0 is generally not recommended. There's a lot of discussion about the value of T1. We know the crops can, in most seasons, can pretty much race through these growth stages. Not so much this year. It's been pretty slow in terms of crop development. So again, you're thinking about a good, robust T1 to control that disease that's got established. And T2 again. So in contrast to the winter barley, this is the timing where you get the major response. So if you're thinking about your bigger input, you're looking for a really active fungicide choice at the T2 timing in spring barley. So giving an example there, the Revistar and the Phoenix. Again, Phoenix being added for specifically for ramularia control, but it also, remember, has Rhynchosporium control on the label. So that's why it's in there. Fiona's touched on this. You know, you'll all have seen coming to press, there is a new product available. So Miravis, launched by Syngenta, it's not just recommended for wheat, it's also recommended for barley. So thankfully it gives us another choice and something else to think about when planning our crop protection programs. Fiona's mentioned its activity against Septoria. It's very good against Rhynchosporium. You can see in these graphs here on the left-hand side, you've got the Miravis Plus. It's outperforming the competition here. It's ahead of the Imtrex, well ahead of the Proline, and ahead of the Astra. And on the right-hand side, if you look at the eradicant activity, again, it's doing very well, especially at the quarter dose. It's outperforming everything else. More of a mixed situation if you up the doses, but it's good to have another option there in terms of Rhynchosporium control. Of course, we don't apply fungicides just to control disease. We want to see that response taken through to yield. And this is where one of Miravis Plus's strengths. You can see that in this graph. You can see that response, especially at quarter dose. It's significantly ahead in terms of that yield. So you're getting more back for your input at that point. So net blotch could be an issue for you in your barley. So where does Miravis sit? You can see on the left-hand side, in terms of protectant activity, it's ahead of its competitors. So it's looking like the best choice if net blotch is going to be an issue to protect the crop, so the pathogen doesn't move up, take out the green leaf area. In terms of eradicant activity, you can see it's a significant step forward, albeit these are fairly low disease levels. But in the graph on the right-hand side, you can see Miravis Plus is a bit ahead of the Astra. Okay. Now, ramularia, since the loss of chlorothalonil, we've been pretty much relying on Myrisa to give us that good ramularia control. It's been a difficult pathogen to control. It's also been strange in terms of its response. So some of the figures which have come back seem to indicate that although we talked about a lack of control from the SDHIs previously, there is perhaps something still going on. You can see in this graph that Imtrex is giving some control. You've got Proline in there as well, so Proline's giving you control. It's perhaps reflected in the Astra X Pro, so that SDHI azole combination is giving you some control. But in most trials, we see that the Myrisa, the methyltrifluconazole, is best in terms of ramularia control. You can see in this graph Miravis Plus, and it's a step ahead again in terms of controlling ramularia. And that's really important because we have been pretty much relying on one product, and there's also the question about application timing. Myrisa has a last application date of 45. If you've missed that, you've very limited options. So the fact that we now have Miravis Plus, which is a later application date, gives you more options in terms of ramularia control. What response do you get from controlling ramularia in terms of yield? This is some trials done on winter barley, and you can see the Myrisa and the Proline, but look at that yield response from the Miravis Plus. Again, it's a step up in terms of taking that disease control and taking it right through to yield. We mentioned in the second slide about the importance of keeping that canopy going for 5 weeks after ear emergence and controlling disease. Well, this is exactly why you're trying to do it. So that's previous year's work. It's a brief update on what we're seeing this year as well. So this is some results hot off the press from trials work that's being done this summer. This is not at In East Lothian, it is at our trial site in Lanark, where we've got a high rhynchosporium pressure, but you can see the purple bars are the rhynchosporium disease levels in the plots. The red is the green leaf area. You can see in the untreated, the diseased areas out is greater than the actual green leaf area that we've got left in the crop. Compare that with the fungicide responses. You've got Proline there and Imtrex. Marisa's not doing a very good job, but you can see Miravis is standing ahead of everything at this point. Okay, so this is a trial, it's halfway through, it will go through to yield, and we'll release these results in the winter roadshows, and this data will also be going to HDB to help form some of the fungicide performance curves for next year. Those of you who heard me talk at various meetings will say have heard that we're also looking into alternatives and how they can be incorporated into a crop protection program for barley. So we've looked at a number of different groups of products, of biostimulants. There's a lot of interest in these, the seaweed extracts. There is a registered product, of course, in wheat to control wheat disease, Laminarin, the brown seaweed from UPL. So we're seeing how that performs in barley. We're looking at elicitors. There's a lot of interest in how these products work. They switch the natural defense responses on in the plant. Can that be included in the crop protection program? And also the biofungicides. A lot of the big companies are putting a lot of resource into producing new biofungicides based on either bacillus or perhaps trichoderma. So this is important. It's a growing field, so it's important to know what products that we have at the moment and how effective they could be against the major diseases we see in barley. This is just some results from a trial that was done last year in the Borders on Laureate. We're interested, of course, in disease control. So the green bars on here are ramularia. If you look, you can see that the bars which are marked E and reduced fungicides, that's the elicitor and the reduced fungicide, and you can see how well the disease is being controlled. The line you see on the graph is the actual yield response. So you can see that that's giving you a yield response. It's greater than what we got from the reduced fungicide on its own, or the elicitor on its own. So that's good to see. Although we didn't see as good disease control with some of the other products, like the biologicals and the biostimulants, if you look at that line, they are still giving a yield response. So that's why we take trials to yield. That's why it's important to take the trial right through to the end. So that was last year's. We've kind of tweaked the program a bit this year. So we're looking again at some different products. So there's your Laminarin, your elicitor, Cernade is a biological, Aminoflow is a biostimulant, Chitosan is another elicitor, phytophosphate, this is a biostimulant, and we're looking at how they can go in. What we're interested in, a lot of these products are best used at the T0 spray, so putting them in at T0 and then going with a really reduced rate T1 and T2 spray timings to see what we get. Okay, so you've got these combined with a pretty low dose of Ascax Pro and then Revistar and Fulpit, just to give them some element of control. And a quick update on what we're seeing this year. We've got 3 varieties in trial, a number of sites, both at Lanark and our site in the Borders. And this is in the plots of Planet, where we actually have a lot of net blotch this year. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got the untreated bars for rhynchosporium and net blotch, around about 10%. The line that you see on the graph is the green leaf area. So you can see that that's reduced the green leaf area. Next to that, we've got the reduced rate fungicide. We've got the biological, which is Cernade, and reduced rate fungicide, and then the phytophosphate. And the interesting thing we're seeing this year already is that's given reasonable control of rhynchosporium, but it's actually giving the lowest figures in terms of net blotch. Okay, so this will be really interesting to take this through. We've got Aminoflow in as well. Aminoflow in previous trials at a fairly high application rate has given a yield response. So we're interested to see if that holds true in combination across a number of varieties going forward. And I hope you can see that pitch just about makeout. You can see at the bottom of that crop, on the left-hand side is untreated. You can see the net blotch is established. It's starting to move up. In the middle, we've got the reduced rate fungicide on its own. And on the right-hand side, you've got the phytophosphate. So you can see it's giving good control of rhynchosporium and net blotch, but we'll see how that trial goes when we take that to yield. And also in a couple of weeks' time, you can see the ears are just coming out. We'll expect the ramularia pressure to come onto the crop as well. Okay, so just to sum up in conclusion, Fiona's already touched on this and Mark's mentioned 2024 is going to be a challenge to control disease in any cereal crop. Also, the same scenario in barley. So some of these new alternatives or alternative products to fungicides are going to be really tested to the limits, because they can look reasonable on fairly low disease pressure, but this year it's really high disease pressure. Giving you an example of Moravis, we've got that new product's been registered, but there are potentially more coming down the pipeline. So it'll be really interesting to see how they fit in and how they all rank against each other in terms of controlling different diseases. And you've mentioned in the poll that you expect your spring barley and barley yields to be down. So we've seen that managing and maintaining yield needs careful management, not just in terms of all inputs, but disease control is just one of them. So that's my last slide. So thank you, and back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, fascinating stuff. And a couple of questions coming in relating to timings on chemicals on barley. Grant's asking, does the early cut-off restriction with Revastar, is that for malting crops, does that worry you as to the control of disease? And sort of linked to that, have you looked at the application timings of T2 sprays in barley? Would they, for example, be better applied earlier at sort of growth stage 49 rather than sort of awns out timing?
So in terms of the first part of that question, yes, it's always been a kind of concern about that Marisa, that early cutoff point at 45. You know yourself, was looking at the window at the rain battering down, the crop can just go past it and you're pretty powerless. So not having that control has always been an issue. The second part in terms of timing, a lot of the previous work we did on ramularia showed that the later you can put the fungicide on, the better. So if ramularia is the issue, so we would be thinking later, and potentially later than 45 will give you better ramularia control. So the fact that Moravis Plus has a later application date, I think is good to have that flexibility, but also better in terms of what we can expect in terms of controlling ramularia.
And what's the prevalence of ramularia been like this year in particular? I've
not seen much. One of the challenges for a late season disease is it has to find a crop. I gave you some figures for the Rhynchosporium trial, and you can see Rhynchosporium just about taking out the entire crop, at which point you won't see much ramularia. So we know from our work that high temperatures, high rainfall suit ramularia. We've not had the high temperatures, we've had the rainfall, but not the high temperatures. So just as Fiona mentioned, it takes high temperatures for septoria to appear because it's all related to the thermal time and day degrees that the crop has. We think it could be the same situation with ramularia. So I've not seen much so far.
But just staying with ramularia, there's a question being asked about, well, in relation to IPM, are we ever going to get a varietal resistance or susceptibility score for ramularia?
Yeah, for PhD students working on it, every time you ask the breeders, they do say it's coming to the top of their priority list, but as of yet, nothing's coming through the system that we're seeing significant increases. Sadly, it takes 10 years to get a variety from first crossing right the way through and onto the recommended list. We are doing research into highlighting areas which are related to ramularia resistance in the spring barley elite varieties, but also looking at it could be that we have to go back to a lot of older lines and older genetic material to actually find that resistance that we need to control ramularia.
Great. Thanks, Neil. That's super.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks very much for that. So before we look at the grain markets, Donald Dunbar's with us, and Donald's going to relay some information that on trial work that we've been doing that perhaps has been given a steer to us from clients and farmers like yourselves that have expressed a specific interest in certain topics. Donald.
Yeah, so sitting in the borders at the moment, and a further 24 mil in the gauge this morning. I'm pleased to say it is a little bit brighter than it was yesterday and earlier this morning. So here's hoping. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the farmer-led consultant trials that we have started at the trial sites. And this was in response to the questions that you as growers have been asking, and it's perhaps where we're not going to get funding to do the trial from industry, so we go and try and do it ourselves. A past example would be the effectiveness of the foliar nitrogen products, and our 2 years of replicated trials showed that the applied foliar nitrogen gave the same response as granular or liquid, and not the 3 to 4 times response that was being claimed by some product manufacturers. I'm going to quickly cover 3 of our current trials. We have a nitrogen fertilizer trial, a biostimulant trial, and a plant growth regulator trial. And I'm also going to say a quick word on protein crops. Last year was the first year we carried out the urea versus ammonium nitrate trial, and we're replicating it this year. It was done on wheat and also on spring barley. It is a replicated trial, and we're also doing it on 2 different sites will help to give us confidence in our results. The trial was principally motivated by the high nitrogen fertilizer prices and more growers using urea for the first time. But the trial also gave us the opportunity to compare the performance of some of the protected urea products that have urease and nitrification inhibitor, and see how they compare with the unprotected urea and ammonium nitrate. Some of you will be aware that in England this year, protected urea is the only product that can be applied after the 1st of April during the growing season. And this follows the introduction of the DEFRA Code of Good Practice for reducing ammonia emissions. 87% of the UK ammonia emissions are from agriculture. And whilst this is mostly livestock, the volatilization of urea is also a factor. Incidentally, Scotland is still to publish its ammonia emissions code of good practice. So the winter wheat trial, the treatments, a zero nitrogen control. Control is always important in any trial. Then 6 different application plots with 220 kilogram nitrogen total. 4 of the treatments were applied as splits, with the final 2 treatments being a single application. And this was to test if the treated products could be used as a slow release. So you're banging on a lot of your nitrogen early season in one go. So here's the result from the Edinburgh site for 2023. So you can see there that the ammonium nitrate gave the highest yield. I think it's worth mentioning that the LSD figure, the least significant difference. So that figure there down in the bottom corner, 0.49. For a treatment to be significantly different, it needs to be a difference of 0.49 for this particular chart. As you can see, the left of the table, the ammonium nitrate returned the highest yield, and that was statistically significantly higher than any other treatment. The single treatment of protected products on the right-hand side of the chart resulted in a lower yield than the split of protected product, but statistically there was no yield difference between the protected and the unprotected urea. Again, I emphasize the fact that this is a single year of trial results. It's possible we will see a difference in the 2024, particularly given the very different weather conditions that we have had, with 2023 spring being particularly dry and the 2024 being particularly wet. In addition to crop yield, we looked at grain and straw nitrogen levels, and there was a statistically higher crop uptake of nitrogen with ammonium nitrate, and no significant, excuse me, I'll put my teeth back in, and no significant difference between the sustain single inhibitor product. The split urea, and the split urea applications. The dual inhibitor had a statistically lower nitrogen uptake than all the other treatments. Part of the 8 to 18% difference in fertilizer recovery percentage may be linked to volatilization of urea to the atmosphere. A different approach was taken in the spring barleys, with 40 kilograms of ammonium nitrate applied at sowing, with 80 kilogram balance applied with different products at leaf 3. The exception being we kept the single application of the two protected products going on at 120 at sowing. Yield. The double split of ammonium nitrate again returned the highest yield, which was statistically significant over the other treatments, except the ammonium nitrate and sustain, which is the single urease protectant. There was no significant difference between the other urea products. There is a difference in the mean nitrogen uptake and fertilizer recovery by crop. The split of ammonium nitrate and sustain being higher than the other products. However, these differences again were not statistically significant. So preliminary messages for year 1, ammonium nitrate gave greater yield and nitrogen uptake than urea in both winter wheat and spring barley. Fertilizer recovery was 8 to 12% greater with ammonium nitrate. The urease inhibitor and sustain improved recovery of urea in winter wheat, but not spring barley. And the double inhibitor products seem to be less effective. Single applications of sustain or OEN resulted in yields and fertilizer recoveries comparable to those of split applications of urea, and there was no evidence that they can be used effectively as slow-release fertilizers. I should acknowledge that the analysis of this trial and some of these charts and messages were prepared by Ian Bingham. So moving on, biostimulants trial. There's a lot of talk about biostimulants. Some are backed with trial data, but many have nothing to support their label claims. So we decided we'd take a look at some of the products this year in spring barley at our Aberdeen trial site, and plan to include winter wheat and winter barley next season. So we are having a look at Vixarin. It's a new product launched this year by Syngenta. It's a nitrogen fixing bacteria applied at T1. Blue N from Corteva, again, a similar type of product. R-Leaf, a photocatalytic product, and you apply at T1 and T2. Nurture N, fulvic and humic acids, T1 and T2, and Bio-N, which are bacteria, again applied at T1 and T2. We have a plant growth regulator trial on spring barley. The plots received 160 kilograms of nitrogen to replicate a high fertility situation. The plots will be taken to yield so that we can see if there is a difference, and there'll be monitoring of the incidence of any brackling, and some other grain quality measurements will be done. I was at the trial site last week, and there was very little difference visually in height. The chloromaquat actually seemed to have had a small effect and was slightly shorter, but there was no real difference at this stage in any of the other treatments. It's just a wee summary of the different treatments there. Finally, protein crops. So why are people perhaps going to be interested in growing some protein crops? High protein prices and the potential to reduce carbon footprint of livestock enterprises is making some producers look at homegrown proteins. And a further reason to consider homegrown proteins is detailed in the AgriForm provisional list of measures, which we believe will be part of the Tier 2 payment requirements. So within the list of measures, you have the different packages and the measures within. And so from an arable point of view, you have the efficient reduced use of synthetic inputs. And so a nitrogen fixing crop would fit into that package. Crop diversity for arable, diversify crop rotation and break crop rotation period, intercropping, and undercropping and mixed cropping. So these are currently in the provisional list of measures. So you can see that protein crops might become of greater interest to growers. So we put in some demo plots. We've got a couple of varieties in those plots, and they are looking well. Now, growing peas might strike the fear of God into some growers who have previously tried to harvest a flattened crop. But good progress has been made over the years, and the PGRO descriptive list gives you the ratings for different varieties, and this is just a little extract from that. There is a range from 5 to 8 on standing ability at harvest. Most varieties seem to be a 7. But another factor which may be of interest in making a selection would be the earliness of maturity. I'm hoping that this is going to play. This is a shot from a field in Angus of peas. You can see how well interlaced they are, giving that stability of the canopy, and you can see the height that they are sitting off the ground there. There we go. So things to consider. Market, obviously, make sure you have a market before you commit to growing. A 5-year rotational break is recommended to avoid a build-up of soil-borne diseases. P&K required as per soil status, somewhere between 40 and 70 kilograms. Sulfur if soil deficiency is expected. Weed control is a bit limited, but pre-emergence giving the best results, and based on pendimethalin products. There are some post-emergence for straight peas. Peas and barley intercrops. So organic growers have been doing this for years, and perhaps this is something for a mixed arable livestock farmer to consider. The peas provide nitrogen to the barley, and the barley helps to support the crop. The seed mix can be sown in a single pass, unlike an intercrop of beans and oats. In terms of preparing that mix, you would go with 60% of your normal pea seed rate, so 60% of maybe 220 kilograms, and 40% of your normal barley seed rate, and then mix those two components together and sow them. Weed control is very limited, and it is just straight pendimethalin. You want to limit your nitrogen application to make the peas work, and 30 kilograms of nitrogen would be adequate if you're wanting to maximize the peas. There are some growers who are conventional growers who are using pea and barley mixture to produce cattle feed, and they're working at 50 to 60 kilograms of nitrogen. So it's probably holding the peas back a bit, but helping to ensure a good barley yield as well. And some of those growers are achieving over 7 tons a hectare. The combination of the crops, they seem to mature at the same time, and so no great difference there. And the samples that we have analysed of the mixed feed, which incidentally was crimped, have given us a 15 to 70% crude protein. So, a significant increase. That's my whistle-stop tour. More information can be found on the Farm Advisory website at fas.scot on intercropping and also growing protein crops, forage crops, as well as cereal crops. Thank you.
Thanks, Donald. Very interesting, and actually some fundamental challenges there to what are perceived applications in terms of fertilizer and the type of application of fertilizer. And I think if you want some more information of that, do feel free to get in touch with Donald. There's some really interesting trial results there from the start of his presentation. Our next and final topic is crop marketing. It's a 15-minute video from Julian Bell, who's pre-recorded it because he's in an area with very limited connectivity today. We've got a short, the last poll question coming up before we share Julian's video with you. And what percentage of your wheat crop will you likely to have marketed ahead of combining this year? If you could answer that, that'll be an interesting take home. Julian actually alludes to the profitability of those 4 different scenarios in his talk later in the presentation that he gives. So finally then, if Craig, you'd like to start Julian's video, and we'll pick up on those results perhaps at the end.
Hello everyone, my name's Julian Bell. I'm working on behalf of SRUC, and today I'm presenting on the cereal market. I'm just going to share my slides. It's been a difficult growing season to date, that's for sure. The winter crops were difficult to get in, and the growing conditions have been pretty poor. So it's not been a great year from a growing point of view. The spring crops were late to go in and not always in the best conditions, but I think they're maybe looking reasonably okay now, spring barley in a generally speaking. But yeah, not a great year from a farming point of view, and the market has been weaker, much weaker than say the last year or two. But it has picked up in the last 6 weeks or so. So today, I'm going to work through, what is the current market situation, what's driving things, whether it's in the UK, Scotland, across Europe and the world. Look at cereals, oilseeds, look at the malting barley market as well. What kind of things could we expect that might drive that going ahead? And then we can look a bit more closely at the sales strategies and margins as well. So what about prices? pretty stable, lowish compared to 2 or 3 years ago, definitely. And they had been pretty stable. We have seen them tick up in the last month or two. So wheat, and if you compare with a year ago, they're a little bit higher for most crops. Wheat's about £10 a tonne higher. Rapeseed's up actually quite a lot, £38 a tonne. Feed barley, £15 a tonne. So, yeah, a small increase on about a year ago. But of course, costs have gone up as well. So on balance, perhaps not a great change. What about the world supply and demand? Well, it's the third year where world consumption is actually greater than world demand. And this year, crop expected to be up 12 million tonnes, but demand's expected up 16 million tonnes, and stocks to come down 9 million tonnes. What we're seeing is just a gradual decline in stocks. Not huge. There's no great shocks. The market's finding enough grain that it needs at the moment, so we're not really seeing this impacting on the price. But just be aware that the market is not oversupplied with grain any more than it was last year. There are some local and regional effects. It's harvest, so that is clearly depressing prices around the world. But fundamentally, things are not really any tighter, any more oversupplied than a year ago, not by any means. Moving back to the UK a bit more closely, this is the planting survey. It's going to be the lowest cereal crop area in 20 years. And you can see big reductions there, 160,000 hectares less wheat, 53,000 hectares less winter barley, 82,000 hectares less oilseed rape. Some of it's been offset with more spring barley, another 122,000. But yeah, overall, we definitely have less cereals. We'll be requiring more imports. There'll be less pressure on us to export grains. Basically, we're going to need them here. What about Scotland? Very similar picture, less winter wheat, more spring crops. But we've actually managed to more or less maintain the overall cereal area and oilseed area. So yeah, less wheat, more spring barley. So we're perhaps a little bit less affected than England, but still that spring to spring crops. But for the winter crops, what are the conditions like? The HDB crop conditions really much worse than normal. A lot more of the crop is in poor condition, whether it's wheat, barley, or oilseed rape. And that I think is pretty expected. The crops look pretty mangy. Some of that wheat probably should have been resown, but growers didn't really get the chance. The spring was difficult, and they just left. Crops were just left to grow because it wasn't clear you could get a reasonable spring crop in either. So yeah, no one's expecting great yields for the winter crops. Spring barley is actually looking much better. Quite a lot of Scotland, I know parts of East Anglia and things, the crops are pretty reasonable. Everyone's reasonably optimistic about those, a lot of those spring barley crops. So some of the spring crops are a bit better. Where does this all leave us in terms of supply and demand locally in the UK? So the key thing in the 23 harvest, a lot of the grain was held on farm or in stores. It wasn't sold, it wasn't exported. So we've got big opening stocks. Over 3 million tonnes are expected, so that's a buffer. Obviously, it was known that we were going to have a small cereal crop, and that's part of the reason. The crop itself could be somewhere around 11 million tonnes. Obviously, depends on the actual yield, but we know there's certainly a lot less in the ground, and it's not conditions not looking good at the moment. Imports are going to be pretty high. Demand's going to be lower for wheat, likely because feed will switch into other things like barley or maize or other feed ingredients, and we might lose a bit of demand to ethanol, etc. Obviously, just a guesstimate at the moment until we see more. But overall, and probably very little exports, we just won't have the grain, and the overall pictures will be a major net importer of wheat and other grains to fill that gap. And again, that means we don't have to be very price competitive on the world market. we're really looking at being at a premium to that base. So although the base has dropped, we should be able to maintain a reasonable premium to it. Moving down a bit more closely into Scotland, distilling, huge market for wheat. Its demand for distilling grain has actually increased a little bit, 2% over the last year. That's been crucial in Scotland. It's helped maintain a good premium, around £12 a tonne over England. And most distillers are using wheat. There is always a risk in Scotland that they could switch to maize if the prices suit them. And the differential, it's quite hard to get a really accurate comparison because a lot of the data is not always available for pricing of, say, imported maize. But it's calculating out a pretty similar price at the moment. Now, that always just means if Scottish wheat doesn't stay competitive, there's a risk that one or two distilleries might switch back to maize. I think there's some confidence that some of the bigger ones are more likely to stick with wheat for quite a number of reasons at the moment. But again, if the price goes the wrong way, then we could lose some demand. So that's a little bit of a worry if world maize prices do drop lower. Now, offsetting that to some extent, of course, the fact we're going to have less wheat in Scotland. So we could have 150,000 tonnes less wheat. So that is that could offset. If we lose a bit of demand to maize, that's probably manageable given the crop's going to be lower. What about malting barley? Well, the malting barley is actually a little bit weaker, 2% down across the UK. Beer sales are flagging, cost of living, people going out less and even spending less on beer when they're at home. Yep, the Euros football could well have given a bit of a boost, but that's a general trend in beer across Europe. And then whiskey hasn't been quite as buoyant the last year or so. Exports actually came back down. So that's feeding through. Still quite a good increase over where we had been in terms of malting barley, but there is a sort of question mark that demand for malting isn't quite as strong as we had seen. But then supply, what about that? Well, in Scotland, if we get that extra 9,000 hectares and the yield is at least average, 6.5 tonnes, then we're going to have another 100,000 tonnes of malting barley. Now, there's still a fair bit of time to go. The weather's got to play its part. Will the crop really yield that? What will the quality be at harvest? Not just here, but across the UK, across Northern Europe, across France. And last year there were problems in Denmark, for instance, and that really bumped up the premium. This year, it's just a little bit too early to see how those crops are actually going to come through in terms of yield and quality. But yeah, we probably will have more malting barley here. And if we look at sort of supply and demand, the capacity to process that malting barley in Scotland is pretty well fixed, around 1 million tonnes. The crop is looking a bit higher, of course, so you would suggest it's not quite as tight for the maltsters in terms of buying. Again, it's so dependent on what is the quality at harvest, what are the actual yields. So yeah, let's not get too ahead of ourselves, but it potentially looks a little bit better supplied in terms of Scotland. As I say, whiskey exports have been weaker in 2023. We need that trend to sort of reverse over time to ensure demand continues to grow. And the premiums, yeah, they're in the sort of £50 over feed mark at the moment around Europe. We're obviously waiting to see quality and things like that. They benefited last year. There were really good premiums, 80 or even up to £100 a tonne at some times. So at the moment, the market is just assuming average quality and all the rest of it. So that final premium really will depend on the final outcome of the harvest. Let's look at costs. So fertilizer prices are down 15 to 20% a year. Again, a bit of a link there to the wider energy prices. When we look at the gross margins, the variable costs come down a lot. For wheat, they're over £1,000 in 2023, £650 maybe for this year. So that's a good saving. Spring malting barley could have been nearly £700 2023, and probably just a bit over 400 this year. So that's really helped. prices a bit higher for wheat at the moment compared to a year ago. Malting barley a little bit less. Overall, a reasonable increase in gross margins, which is quite a welcome improvement from last year, but of course, very much reduced from 2 or 3 years ago. And net margins, of course, fixed costs keep going up, whether it's labor, machinery, all the rest of it. So net margins are less exciting, but certainly look better at the moment based on standard sort of costs and assuming current forward prices for grains for the coming harvest. Now, of course, anything could change, any of these factors could change, but looking a little bit more positive at the moment, margin-wise, but clearly not where they were 2 or 3 years ago. And this is where selling comes in, because of course it's the price that the grain sold at that really matters in terms of margin. And you can see the different strategies: sell before harvest, sell after harvest, some sort of combination. Selling after harvest, you capture those really good highs when they come, but you're more vulnerable to the lows, which is what we're getting at the moment. And if you look at the various strategies, sort of recalculating them, wait until it's in the shed is given potentially the highest price, but it's not actually any better from those strategies where you're selling some forward, and it's got more of a downside. So really that, selling a third, maybe up to half before harvest if the price is right, and then seems to give you a pretty reasonable average, and it keeps you out of the low points. So looking forward, forward prices are still higher for harvest, and in fact higher than earlier in the year. So wheat's around £11 higher than it was in January. The barley, malting barley is actually a bit lower, 20 odd pounds lower than it was. But rapeseed, £46 higher than it was in January. So some positives there in terms of some of those crops to take a good look at those forward prices. So let's summarise where we are and sort of sum up. What's positive in the market? The world's cereal stocks do continue to fall. It's gradual. There's been no great shocks recently, and the market is saying, they're coming down, but we've still got enough. So what's the problem? That could change, but that's kind of where we are. But just the other thing, just to be aware, we're not overburdened in grain any more than we were a year ago. So we're not worse off, but again, without a major shock, the market is just ticking along just to see what's going to happen next. The main issues at the moment have been in Europe, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, with drought, frost. They've not, the yield expectations come down there. However, once the combines are rolled, things are not quite as bad in Russia, and they're still exporting. So, one to watch, and it has been one of the more positive things in the market, but that might have passed in terms of its impact. Moving across to more Western Northern Europe, France is harvesting, and they are disappointed. They are finding the yields poorer than they thought, and that might become a bit more of a theme as other countries get going, and the European production estimates have been cut back. So that's probably one of the strongest positives in terms of underpinning the market. We get to the UK, lowest cereal crop in 20 years. The winter crops are in poor condition. And the UK is going to be a big wheat importer, and Scotland's going to be down wheat as well. Could be 150,000 tonnes less wheat. So we don't need to export. We're going to need all our grain just locally. And distilling demand, has been strong, so that's been a positive. It underpins the market in Scotland, but the gap with the price differential with maize is narrowing, so just be very aware of that. And if the world maize crop is good, then that could be a danger point. Other negative things, as I say, used to put more maize in the ground. The weather's been reasonably okay so far. They're not out of the woods yet. There's a bit more time to go in terms of the growing season. So just, again, a very good one to be keeping an eye on. Soybeans, there's more time for something to happen there, because it's not really till August that their yields gets determined. So if heat moves back into the US in that time frame, then of course those big estimates for soy might not be realised. But overall the crop's bigger. Argentina is a big crop, so we are really we're needing some weather issue with soybeans to put that off course. As I say, Russia's actually done better than we thought. It's down, but not just down as much as we thought. It moves to malting barley. Spring crops they're not suffering the same as the winter crops. The yields look better. There's certainly more in the ground, and there has been a sort of tapering off of demand in terms of malting in recent months. And it may, whether it's beer demand being a bit weaker, and also the whiskey industry seems to have faltered a little bit in terms of exports. Will that pick back up again? We don't know, but it's not quite as positive. Stocks for malting barley are lower, so that's quite a good thing. But if the weather is good, the quality is good, then we seem to be more likely to have a sufficient supply this year, unless there's an issue with weather. And of course, that could happen in the UK and Scotland. It could happen in Europe. So we're just a little bit early to know where that malting barley premium is going to go. And in terms of just strategy, I keep looking ahead. There are some opportunities in the new crop where prices are higher. Look at the market, look at the weather. There are still weather issues here in Europe to be looking out for. Things a little bit further away, like the US soybean crop, and then what starts to happen with the Southern Hemisphere will start to become more important. So look out for those opportunities and sell when it gets above your budget. And again, whatever strategy you've got, find one that matches your attitude for risk. Spreading sales is the classic one that just keeps you out of the worst of the troughs and can give you a reasonable average. But whatever strategy you have, just stick to it and just have a confidence in knowing your costs and responding to the market when you see some opportunities. So that's all I had for today, and thanks very much for joining.
Great. Well, I'll pass on my thanks to Julian. That was an interesting talk, and it looks like we know from what you're saying that the wheat yields are looking to be down, and the area is looking to be down. So by how much, it looks like wheat's going to be fairly tight this year. You're also telling us that barley yield's going to be down, and the barley area has gone up. So I suppose it's the interplay of those two. Julian also mentioned that selling a third before and 2/3 after harvest is probably one of the more favoured selling strategies, and you're telling us here that the majority of you probably do similar. So 30% of you are selling 15 to 30% of your wheat ahead of combining. 15% are selling up to 15%, and a lower number, 10%, are selling 30% more before combining. So a good spread there in a risk strategy. Okay, so we're drawing matters to a close. We've got a few more slides and subjects. Craig's got a couple of points to raise on whole farm plans, I believe. Craig, are you going to cover those off?
Yep, thank you, Mark. So just before I went on to that, just a wee reminder, as Steve always does for us, is provide the commentary on the Scottish recommended list for cereals. So what we'll do in the next day or two is we'll get them emailed out to you. Before the Highland Show, the Scottish Government started to give us a little bit of input as to what we were going to require to meet our demands for submitting our IACs for them next year. So they developed this whole farm plan, which consists of 4 or 5 different options that you can see on the screen there. So for arable farmers, over the next 4 years, what we're going to need to do is make sure every farm's got a carbon audit, make sure every farm's got a biodiversity audit, an IPM plan, and then every farm that over a 5-year rotation needs to get all of their soil analysis up to date on all your Region 1 ground that is going to be receiving fertilisers or organic manures. So as it stands just now, for 2025's IACs, we're going to need to do 2 of the 5 of these options. And hopefully most of you are already well on your way to having done that. But if not, there's a couple of links here that can help you complete some of these things. So the Plant Health Centre is your go-to for completing your IPM plan. And the chances are you might already be doing that for Scottish quality cereals. Again, if you do have livestock in your systems, Scottish Government and SRUC vets have developed the SAHPS link. So again, you can go and do your animal health and welfare plan on there. And similarly, if you use one for QMS for your accreditation, you can utilise that animal health and welfare plan. For your biodiversity audit, all they're looking for is a habitat map. So Nature Scotland have developed an app which is currently under testing, and I think it's going to be available over the next 2 or 3 months. So you can either do it on that, or you can do your own sort of paper-based maps. But if you do choose the biodiversity audit to be one of your 5 for next year, you need to submit that map along with any other maps or supporting evidence that you need for your IACS forum. So yeah, just in summary, in 2025, you're going to need 2 of the 5 plans. In 2026, it's a wee bit vague, but you're going to need to have done more than 2 plans. And then by 2028, you're going to need to have done all 5 of the plans if your business is claiming a basic payment scheme. So this is for your money as it stands just now, and as Donald alluded to earlier, for tier 2 and tier 3 options, then there are going to be new stipulations on whether that's for money that's already getting paid, or whether that's additional requirements to match the funding that you've already got. We're not aware of. We don't know that information as it stands. So hopefully over the coming months we'll get a bit more clarity on what will be needed. And the final point there is, by 2028, all farms will need to have a nutrient management plan added to that list of 5. So suddenly we've got six documents that makes up your aspect of the whole farm plan. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Okay, just before we go, I just wanted to give you a quick update as to an event that's happening tomorrow that I'd like to invite you along to if you're free in any area. It's at 2 p.m. at Haddon Farm near Kelso. We're looking at the potential of integrating industrial hemp into rotations. We're going to see the crop growing at Haddon Farms, and we'll be discussing a funded study looking at forming a farming cooperative to supply baled hemp to a local manufacturer. So it's quite an exciting project. If you'd like to reserve a place or get further information, do call us on 0131 603 7520. That's 0131 603 7520. Before we conclude, there's just one more question that's come in for the panel. It's regarding the severe tipping that's been seen on Dawson this year. Could we perhaps have a response to that from one of the panelists? Have any of you observed that in trials or in commercial fields?
It was evident in low levels at Salford, but I must admit I don't have much to compare it with at other sites, so I've not sort of noticed that being above normal levels this year.
Okay,
we'll get interested to know where that comes from, if that's a particular area that we could investigate.
Certainly. Okay. Well, in the chat, if the person that asked the question would like to put their email, we'll get an answer to Fiona's typing a question, but the typing an answer, sorry. Anyway, that aside, thank you very much for attending this afternoon. We've gone over time slightly. I apologise, but I hope you found it informative. We'll email out a feedback form for your comments. That'll help us ensure that we improve and identify opportunities to influence the future of the Farm Advisory Service programmes. It just leaves me, on behalf of myself and my panellists, to say thank you and wish you a pleasant afternoon. Thank you very much.